This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Just a heads up, there is some quick, strong language in this episode. In the days since an American Airlines flight collided with a Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River, killing dozens, there's this one fact I can't stop thinking about. It's been 15 years since a crash like this happened. 15 years ago, the iPhone was essentially brand new. Barack Obama had just been elected president. It seems like a lifetime ago. And that means a couple of things. First, we haven't responded as a country to a big random accident like this one in a while. But it also means some experts had been waiting for this moment, dreading it. A year and a half ago, Slate's Dan Coyce wrote an article titled, "Everyone seems to agree a major plane crash is coming. We're overdue," one pilot told him. You must have been thinking about that article as soon as you heard that this crash had taken place.
I was thinking about all the pilots that I talked to for that article.
Dan lives just a few miles away from Reagan National Airport. I called him up to talk about how his reporting holds up now.
The piece was in response to this very good New York Times investigation in which they just went through a lot of publicly available records of near misses. And those records showed that there were just way more near misses, particularly around American airports, in landing and taking off than any air passenger ever would have known about. And I wanted to talk to pilots about what seemed to me to be the kind of unspoken result of this investigation, which is, do pilots take off feeling like, oh, is today going to be the day that there's a big crash? Like, do pilots assume that one is coming? And the answer is that yes, almost all of them do.
But knowing a big crash like this was coming, seeing all the patched up holes in the aviation system that might have made it more likely, it doesn't seem to have made anyone more prepared. Instead of somber reflection, we've gotten the blame game, most shamelessly from Donald Trump, who called a press conference to say diversity efforts caused the collision. He even listed off a bunch of disabilities, implying that no one with, say, hearing trouble or partial paralysis could be an effective air traffic controller.
Air traffic control training is like notoriously difficult, and an enormous number of people wash out of it. Like, it's not like you walk in the door and they hand you a pair of headphones and a microphone and they're like, okay, get that guy onto runway 33. It like takes years, and lots of people don't succeed for various reasons. And so it's one of the few jobs in America that seems legitimately pretty merit-based, like an actual meritocracy.
I think the best encapsulation to me of how confusing and confused things have been is that it took a really long time for us to figure out who was in the military helicopter in particular in this crash. Because there was one crew member whose parents didn't want her name released. They were afraid, it sounds like, of what that could mean for them and their family and the memory of their daughter, which you can kind of understand in a world where the president is blaming diversity and equity efforts for what took place.
Right.
We now know this was 28-year-old Rebecca Lobach, who seems to have been a quite respected, decorated military member. But to me, it's like symbolic of how confusing and chaotic the response has been.
We haven't seen what the aftermath of a big plane crash that kills a lot of people at an American airport looks like in a decade and a half. And once upon a time, in an era when plane crashes were much more common, the response to an incident like that was very regimented. And everyone knew, no one comments on it except for the NTSB. No one speculates publicly. And so it was quite shocking, I think, for people of our age who remember the days when there were plane crashes more regularly, to see a crash like this treated with the full force of the 2025 hellscape. But that is just the way things are now.
Today on the show, the trouble with American aviation is clear, but the fixes are not. Why? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It is extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example of Doublenomics. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Can we just go through what we think we know right now about this crash? Like, some of the reporting I've heard in the last few days is that the helicopter was flying higher than it should have been before it collided with the passenger jet. That maybe air traffic control didn't have great visibility on the helicopter. They didn't necessarily know how high it was. And not just that, but that air traffic control at the airport was understaffed. Can we talk about how all of these sort of beginnings of reporting fit in with the landscape you'd laid out a year and a half ago? Like, when you hear these things, do you think, yep, that follows?
Certainly the air traffic control issue follows, because air traffic control staffing is, like, to me, it seems the number one crisis, the number one issue with airline safety in America right now.
Yeah, let's be specific about what is out there. Like, the Washington Post has said staffing levels were not normal the night of the crash.
Right. So in the actual tower that night, they had sent home a controller. We don't know why, but they had sent home a controller, which meant that one controller was basically doing two jobs, overseeing helicopters and planes, when typically that would be two controllers. But that's not particularly unusual. So, like, full staffing for the United States' air traffic controllers would be over 14,000 controllers. And as of the end of last year, we had 10,800 controllers. So that's like sort of roughly 2/3 of the number that we should have. And that's not new. That's the way it's been for, like, you know, as long as people can remember. So the result is that all those controllers are all working 60-hour weeks. Pulling longer weeks than that is not at all uncommon. And towers are frequently understaffed. If someone's sick, if someone has to go home, if someone has an emergency, you know, if anything happens, there isn't a lot of give in the system to solve those problems when a traffic controller can't work. And so in towers all over the place, everyone's working a really long time. They're frequently doing more than they should be doing. And they're doing it in, you know, what seems to civilians like us correctly, an insanely high pressure environment of the sort that I can't even imagine trying to work in, even under optimal circumstances.
Can I ask, when you talked to people in this world, why they thought these circumstances were allowed to continue. Because to me, I look at it and I'm like, oh, this seems like a big problem. We should fix it. But it seems like for multiple administrations, it's not a political thing. We just haven't filled the jobs.
We haven't funded them. Yeah, we haven't funded and filled the jobs. And it's a self-perpetuating system. Like in an ideal world, being an air traffic controller would be an exciting and challenging, but not demoralizing and impossible job. Because it is, they lose tons of controllers every year, and even the hiring that they can do never is enough to overcome the number of people who quit, because it's it's a very burnout prone position. And yes, it's not just the Trump administration. Go back as many administrations as you can imagine, as long as there's been air travel, basically, they have not funded the air traffic control system well enough. I mean, basically, you back all the way back to Reagan, when Reagan fired an enormous number of air traffic controllers because they were striking. In some ways, that particular part of the industry never exactly recovered from like that shock to the system.
It's interesting. I'm glad you brought up the Reagan and the strike of the air traffic controllers, because to me, I look back on that. I've been digging into this a little bit, and it's federal workers can't go on strike. It's against the law. It's like a felony. And you can also get a black mark against you. Like, you cannot be hired again by the federal government if you strike. And to me, it takes away this like safety valve to have these people unable to withhold their work if they feel like what's happening is unsafe. It means that the people who will then be the check on safety are the passengers in the airplane. Like, something wrong, really wrong has to happen and people have to die. And then it's like, oh, things are maybe not going right, as opposed to the air traffic controllers walking out, which would stop plane traffic, but would potentially not be deadly. You know what I'm saying?
Right. If air traffic controllers could strike and did, the ripple effects of that would be immediate and intense and would probably force the hand of the government to actually solve this problem. And so it really sucks that they can't do that. I will say that, like, characterizing the safety system as being sort of this all or nothing scenario, like if the air traffic controllers can't strike, the only thing that's going to alter the system in any way is a fatal crash, is not exactly right. Like, there is a really robust system of self-reporting in aviation, in American aviation, which is pretty unique, and which does actually cause like real incremental change in important ways on like the micro level and the macro level.
Tell me how it works.
There's a huge database that is actually run by NASA, which is called the Aviation Safety Reporting System. And it is a confidential, voluntary, non-punitive self-reporting system that all commercial and amateur pilots use to report anything, any fuck up, basically. Anything that goes wrong in the air, on the runway, while loading a plane, whatever.
So I'm a pilot. I see something that feels not right to me. I log into the system, note it down, and it goes to some higher up anonymously.
It gets publicly released, and it gets disseminated to everyone in the airline industry with your personal information rescinded. And so basically every near miss, and there are plenty of near misses, is in that system. Every time that a plane almost hit a drone on the way to the runway, which if you look through that system seems to happen like every freaking day. Every time that a plane takes off and some passengers smell a weird odor, or a passenger drops their cell phone under their chair and it starts on fire and the fire extinguishers don't work right. Like, and every time a pilot or a flight attendant or an officer makes a mistake that they wish they hadn't made, that goes into this system. There's just a really healthy self-reporting spirit. There's an emphasis on that in the aviation industry. I mean, because they know they're not going to be punished for it. They're not going to lose their license. And when I first heard about this, it like blew my mind. Like, what do you mean they're not? No one's being disciplined for these things. And yet, so many of the things that these pilots are reporting are like solvable, fixable problems that, because pilots are reporting, oh, on this particular kind of aircraft, when you open the door this way, this wrong thing happens and that's dangerous. then that gets sent to the airline, so the airlines know to fix that in maintenance.
So these are more than just messages in a bottle? The issues do get fixed?
Yes, they're not. They're read by everyone and they affect change. Like every pilot I talked to said they knew about conditions at airports, specific runways, specific gates, specific kinds of planes that had been fixed because a bunch of people reported it to the ASRS.
Huh. I mean, that makes me feel better.
The problem is that you have the safety system that is really dedicated and robust, which is then encountering hard caps on how safe it can be, which have nothing to do with the system and have everything to do with a political lack of will to fund these specific important things, to fund air traffic controllers, to fund surface detection systems, which are systems at airports that they're basically like radar systems at airports that alert air traffic control if there's some kind of unusual situation on a runway, like a coming collision. You know, the NTSB urged the FAA to install these systems everywhere in 2017. There are currently 45 of them in the over 500 American airports. And that's because they just don't have the money for it. The FAA is like, well, we don't have money to install all these systems. We'll try and find a different way to do this.
Yeah, because it sounds like this is more complicated than just like fixing a door on a plane. This is like a system-wide upgrade that needs to happen in a bunch of different places. And frankly, it requires federal funding, not just, Boeing making sure the plane isn't falling apart.
Right. I mean, it would help also if Boeing wasn't completely screwed up. But
that's another show.
Right. A whole different can of worms. But what I find really revelatory about this crash in particular, I mean, the crash really suggests some of the many problems of the Elon Musk Doge style federal management system, which is fire everyone and let God sort it out. But also, this specific flight, this Wichita to National flight on American, has only been flying for about a year. And it was a new flight added to National, an airport that pretty much everyone, the Washington Airports Authority, the NTSB, the FAA, pretty much everyone agrees that that airport is at or above capacity for safe and efficient use. But they keep adding flights to it. Why do they keep adding flights to it? Mostly it's because Congress people lobby really, really hard to add flights to it. Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, his response to this crash was, oh my God, I personally lobbied for that Wichita flight because it makes it so much easier for people in Kansas, including me, to get back and forth to Washington.
I know that flight. I lobbied American Airlines to begin having a direct nonstop flight service to DCA.
They added 5 flights to National last year. There's 10 more brand new flights that are scheduled to be added just in the next few weeks. Almost all of those came after pressure from Congress and airlines. Congress are the ones who are the only ones who can authorize flights to and from National that go outside the smallish radius of flights that are typically allowed to depart and leave from National. So like when you fly from National to Phoenix, flights aren't supposed to be able to go that far from National because National doesn't really have particularly great or long runways. That flight exists because of John McCain.
So you're saying Congress people basically have an eyes bigger than stomach problem? Like they want all the flights, but actually do not have room for them?
Right. And their priority typically on an average day when they think about air travel is maximizing the potential and the convenience of air travel for them and their constituents. When there's a crash, as happened last week, then their attention turns to safety. And when there hasn't been a crash for 15 years, there's been no particular reason for Congress to focus on safety when they had the opportunity to do what they wanted to do with air travel, which is to make it, in their view, better for them and their constituents.
After the break, how confidence in air travel could be undermined if politicians can't find the political will to pay for the resources airports need.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
Can we talk about the pilot issue? Because something that one of your sources flagged is that part of the sort of constellation of issues here is not just that there have been these near misses and there aren't enough systems to track them and there are too many flights being loaded into airports that maybe don't have full capacity of air traffic controllers. It's that we don't have enough experienced pilots. How did that shortage come about?
When COVID happened, most of the passenger airlines really shrunk their flight load and laid off or encouraged to retire an enormous amount of people, including a lot of their pilots. And then when traffic picked up a couple years later, all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, they didn't have enough pilots for their planes. Some of those pilots came back, but the pilot training process it's very slow. I mean, by design, it's very slow and arduous. And so it takes a number of years to become qualified to pilot even the smallest commercial passenger plane. And I mean, the only way to become a really experienced pilot is to fly a lot. And so, people I talked to a couple of years ago would say, when I started as a pilot, I had 6,000 hours in the air, and that was pretty typical. And now we're hiring these pilots who are good, they're very good at what they do, but they have 1,000 hours of experience or 2,000 hours of experience. And so they just haven't had the repetition and face the scenarios and situations that a more experienced pilot has. And that's what happens when you eliminate a bunch of the workforce and then all of a sudden you're scrambling to rehire and to bring up, from the minor leagues, basically, people to replace those people.
It seems to me like you're laying out a string of problems that we're almost comically unequipped to fix in this moment.
Oh, well, in this particular moment, yes.
Yeah. Like the first thing I saw on my socials after this crash happened was the GOP blaming the Democrats, Pete Buttigieg, et cetera, and the Democrats saying people need to be asking Trump why this isn't his fault. That seems not useful, given everything you've just laid out about decades of issues to dig out from here and the need for solid investment at a time when many people in, say, Congress are talking about systemically cutting government services.
And then the second thing that we heard was Trump and Pete Hegseth and the new Secretary of Transportation blaming the crash on DEI.
DOT is a big department. The only DEI office that exists in the whole department was at the FAA. Now that existed up to a week ago. That's now gone.
Which, in addition to being absurd on its face, also flies completely counter to the kinds of broad and creative recruitment efforts it will actually take to fill the actual staffing holes in these various systems.
Right. You need to be inviting people in, not trying to keep people out.
Right. The air traffic control system needs to find every way it possibly can to fucking convince people to be air traffic controllers.
Is there an argument that people in aviation are somehow asking for too much, being greedy in what they need here, being wasteful?
I mean, one counter argument is that we haven't had a fatal crash in 15 years. You know, as one pilot who I talked to, he pointed out absolute safety is something that everyone is chasing after, but it's not, by definition, it is not attainable. The system is never going to be absolutely safe. And so at some point, perhaps America will come to a point of feeling like, well, if what we have is one crash every 15 years, that is as close as we're going to get to absolute safety, and that's just the way it is. And then you sort of choose to ignore the stresses or the near misses or things like that, and you just say, it's safe enough. It's as safe as we can get it under current circumstances.
I don't know. Who's the politician who's going to stand up and say a midair collision once every decade or decade and a half is the price you pay, America?
Right. Who's the air passenger who's going to be like, well, all right. Who's the person whose family was on that plane who's going to be like, well, it's had to be someone.
Yeah.
But also on a much more dangerous and much more damaging and fatal level, that's exactly how we are about driving. Like, America on the whole has come to accept that a certain number of deaths in cars is just normal for our society. That's just the way it is. And it's worth it for the system, the highway system and the driving system and the driving priorities and city planning priorities that we have. Like, America has essentially come to accept like a much greater amount of carnage than even at the worst years of plane crashes in America. People weren't dying at anything like the levels that people die every month in car crashes in the United States. And like, with the exception of, you know, advocates and family members, everyone else has basically been like, well, that's the way it is.
I guess it's just a question of how numb America wants to get.
Right.
Dan Kois, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Dan Kois is a writer at Slate. He's also the author of 5 great books. Check them out. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky if you want to say hi. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time. This episode is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It is extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example of Doublenomics. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.